Okay, my man, I'll get us kicked off and we can get into it. Channeling the goodness. Welcome back to another edition of the Elliot Reeves Show. I am Elliot Reeves, and today I am joined by none other than Dan Collins. Dan is founder and owner of Hemp, a fantastic shop down in Edinburgh's Great Junction Street in Leith. And he is, I guess, Edinburgh's resident expert in all things cannabis.
Dear. I wouldn't necessarily call myself an expert, but
close to.
yeah,
By most people's standards.
I know more than the average bear.
You do,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
I spend a lot of time talking about cannabis and a lot of time reading about it and a lot of time, studying it.
Yeah.
Well, a nice way of putting it.
It is. I like that.
I have
like
a lot
that.
of fondness for it.
Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to find out as to how this all became one of your passions. But,
Right.
Going back to the sort of start, I mean, where are you from? You don't sound like you're from here.
Oh. he's twigged. Yeah, so I was born in Northern Ireland, in a little town called Derry. I'll say a little town, it's a city. My parents wouldn't forgive me for saying town. Born in Derry. I came to Edinburgh, I was about 18, so that's about 14 years ago, to study.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people.
Yeah.
Came to one of Edinburgh's fine institutions. Did my degree, graduated and stuck around. I've done a lot of different things. I've worked in tourism. I've worked in a vape shop. I've worked a lot in social care. I've even worked in a whiskey tourist attraction. So I've done a lot of different things, and I've somehow found myself running a cannabis shop.
A good grounding for what you're doing now, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, you're talking about intoxicants, you're talking about things you can inhale, and talking about educating people, and of course looking after people. So there's a lot of things that kind of come together. In the shop I see people from a lot of different backgrounds and with a lot of varying levels of need. So my experience in social care lends itself to that. Being able to talk about products that are kind of nebulous, like how does this taste? How does it make you feel?
Yeah.
Well, I've done a lot of vaping, and I've talked a lot about whiskey as well. So there's a lot of things that kind of come together.
Yeah, they dovetail really nicely.
Yeah, and then because my degree is speech and language therapy, which no one sees coming. I think a lot of people maybe assume that I did music or art.
Botany.
Yeah, something like that. Nah, not even business. Speech therapy. So yeah, everything from the diaphragm up, that was my life for 4 years.
Seriously?
Yeah. So that gives you kind of a good understanding of how humans function and the kind of things that we do, how the brain works and how physiology works. So I did modules in everything from neurology, cognitive neuropsychology, psychology, research methodology, critical analysis, how to design a study, how to plan therapy, how to do all these things. And I even did a module on how social deprivation can affect language developments, and how there is a fairly easily quantifiable gap between the rich and poor just in terms of the quality and quantity of their language. So yeah, I've got a broad base to lean on.
I like it. Fascinating stuff. Yeah. Cannabis. When did your sort of journey into that world first begin?
All right, we're going to go right back to the 90s here. And I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I remember seeing on the news, Prince Charles was meeting a group of patients who had multiple sclerosis. And he said to them, "Have you ever tried smoking cannabis? I hear it's the best thing for it." Now, at this point, my ears picked up because my dad had multiple sclerosis. So I'd been aware of MS as a degenerative neurological disorder ever since I was like 2 or 3. And the way my parents would describe it is that, daddy's pushed his sleepy button and he needs to go lie down. And it was just kind of part of daily life. So I kind of, 10, 11 years old, "Dad, what's cannabis? What's that about? What is?" "Oh, son, it's a dangerous drug. It's illegal. You could end up in jail." I was like, well, he was half right, looking back.
Yeah.
That his attitude was that because it was illegal, it was dangerous. It was illegal for a reason. And that just kind of went to the back of my mind. I didn't really think about it much. When I came to university, by the time I came to Edinburgh, I'd never tried cannabis myself. I made some friends in Hall's residence, and eventually decided, I'm going to give this a shot. And I thought it was pretty cool. To be fair, the first time I tried it, I didn't really notice anything. And that's not uncommon. A lot of people who, when they first try cannabis, they don't actually really notice anything. Now, it's not everyone. It's not particularly common, but they didn't really notice anything. The next time, however, melted. So I was sitting in like my friend's dorm, and we're just kind of sitting, my friend was playing some piano or just chatting or whatever, and I'm kind of like lying back on the couch, just like, so this is cool. Security guard comes in, knock on the door. All right, lads, you want to keep the noise down? Just no problem, right? I think that was very telling as well, that the authority at the time was just like, whatever. Fast forward a few years, I used cannabis on and off during my early 20s. We had like all good friendships, we had our ups and downs. We've had a complex relationship over the years. There's very few things in life that we have a relationship with. I think cannabis is one of them. Cannabis, alcohol. You don't really have a relationship with coffee. No one really refers to coffee as their friend. It's just something that you use. People have a relationship with alcohol, and people, I think, have a relationship with cannabis as well. There's a bit of give and take with that. So there were times during my 20s where it wasn't really much of a friend, and there were times where I leaned on it a bit heavier. As I got older, like maybe like 2010, 2011, what age would I have been then? Like 24, 25 kind of time. I started using it more frequently. Part of the reason was I was depressed. I was in a job that I didn't really like. I was working in social care. It was very, very demanding. And my mental health it wore down. And I think that's one of the things with mental health. It's not always just one thing. It's the gradual accumulation of lots of little things. I was on antidepressants, and one of the things that I noticed with antidepressants, with the dose that I was on, was that dreams. I had far too many really intense dreams. My sleep patterns got a little bit weird. So I'd go to bed and I would wake up like really early in the morning and just be like, right, ready to go. But my head would be filled with these dreams. And what tends to happen if you dream a lot is you ruminate on those dreams a lot. And it just kind of puts you in a weird space. Like, I don't really believe necessarily that dreams have any inherent deep meaning. If like they might do, there's going to be stuff in there floating around from your subconscious that's going to pop up. But if you're just constantly plagued thinking about what did that mean, and even though you can reason with yourself, it's a dream, man, it's a brain fart, it's not really a real thing, but you can still. So yeah, that was bothering me.
So you don't think that we're accessing a different realm whilst in dream state?
I doubt it. I mean, I'd be willing to be proved wrong, but my kind of take on what a dream is your brain does an awful lot of unconscious processing throughout the day, and it just needs to clear that information out. Yeah. So it's just kind of let it all out, easy peasy. But yeah, during this time I realized that if I was using cannabis, these dreams weren't a problem. Like, they just didn't, they didn't happen. I didn't dream as much, and that was really useful for me to just be like have normal day-to-day function. Other things I noticed that there's other side effects associated with antidepressants, including one of the things I got was kind of not an OCD kind of thing, but that kind of like, if something comes up, I need to do it. So I could be sitting there in the middle of the afternoon and suddenly I'd fancy like a Galaxy Ripple, and I'd have to go to the shop and get one. Even if it was like unbelievably inconvenient, I would go to the shop because I just had to do that thing. Those kind of intense impulses just kind of eased off a little bit. So after a while I stopped using antidepressants, and I would just use cannabis. It's fine. At this point I was still smoking, and for people at home, don't smoke cannabis with tobacco. We can get to that later, but we'll get this in early. No tobacco. And yeah, like after a couple of years, I changed job from social care. I worked in a vape shop for a while, so I got into vaping and using electric cigarettes, and inevitably got into using cannabis vaporizers, which are a much healthier, much safer, and more efficient way of using your cannabis. You get miles out of bags of weed when you use a vaporizer. You can get I can easily get a week out of a gram. At least. Really? At least. Like, it's so efficient. Anyway,
so does that still require inhalation of smoke?
Not smoke, vapor. So the idea with the vaporizer is it's heating the product up to just about some devices you can actually tailor what temperature it goes to, but the idea is it's heating the volatile chemicals, so the terpenes and the cannabinoids, and they're just vaporizing. The rest of the plant remains intact. So when you when you open your vaporizer after you've used it, the cannabis you've put in there is now kind of like a brown and dry. You can still use that. So if desperate times call for desperate measures, always have a little jar of pre-vaped cannabis. What you can then do is you can water cure that, which takes all the bitter tannin flavors out of it, and then you can use that plant in cooking. Now, it's not going to have the same effect as using fresh bud, but it has its place. It's not going to waste until the herb itself turns black and it's not carbonated. Totally different. Until it's been burnt, it's not gonna. There's still something in there to use. So I got into that, and that was interesting. And then, basically, the where the story leads then is it takes a serious turn, because up at this point I was just kind of a jolly little stoner just getting on with my day. In 2016, my dad, who I mentioned earlier, had multiple sclerosis. His multiple sclerosis got very, very bad very, very quickly. Okay. So we went from a place where, with people with multiple sclerosis, often what you see over long periods of time is a gradual degeneration. And what happens is the immune cells in the brain, I think they're called microglia, immune specialized white blood cells in the brain start attacking the insulation that goes around our nerve cells. And those neurons are coated in what's called myelin, and it's just like the rubber that you get on like a cable. Like it keeps the signal intact. But what happens in multiple sclerosis is that the immune system turns against that material and starts to degrade it. So there's a lot of different symptoms that are associated with that, and there's different types of MS, and everyone's affected differently. But it's the most common degenerative neurological disease, and it's particularly common in Northern Europe because there is an association with sunlight. So we'll come back to that later, because there's a big play coming on that. Anyway, my dad's multiple sclerosis got really bad really quickly. He was hospitalized, and in the space of about 24 to 48 hours, he went from being able to sort of moved to a certain extent. He used a wheelchair a lot, but he went from being able to have a conversation and feed himself and sort of wander about the house to being bedbound without language and without the ability to move, dress himself, eat. He was actually not long after that. Maybe a few months after that, it became nil by mouth. So yeah, it was really, really quick. And it was a huge shock. Like when I first heard, we assumed that this was my dad about to die. So I rushed from Edinburgh over to Derry, and we sat by his side. One of the things I remember was him being rushed to Belfast, because there's the whole hospital in Derry, which is convenient, but the hospital in Belfast is a much better developed neurological wing. So I remember him being rushed to Belfast, and basically he'd started having sort of seizures, he was just non-responsive, and he spent the last 2.5 years of his life in hospital. One of the things that happened was there was this huge damage to his brain. I've seen the scans. There was a huge amount of demyelinization and scarring and lesions on his brain. And the doctors didn't really have any options. So one of the things they did was they offered a treatment. I can't remember the name of the drug, but it's a drug that has been shown to be successful in halting the progression of MS. It can't undo damage, but it can stop it getting any worse. However, there's always a risk. In the worst case scenario, this chemical can trigger a condition called progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. It's a big word, but we'll just call it PML for short. So PML is like hyper-aggressive multiple sclerosis. Okay. Now, there's very certain conditions that or criteria that you need to meet for that to happen. It just so happened my dad was unlucky, and whether it was PML or it was just MS, at any rate, his condition just continued to get worse. It did slow down a little bit, and for the majority of the last couple of years of his life, he was quite happy. He wasn't, the part of his brain that had been affected wasn't, the part of the brain that had been affected, he didn't realize how limited he was. He spent more and more time asleep every day until he eventually passed away. It was just in August of last year. During that time, for the first 6 months of my dad being in hospital, and this is 2016, for the first 6 months I drank myself stupid because I didn't know what else to do. I changed job, that didn't help me any. I tried doing loads of different things, but I just felt terrible. At the end of August in 2016, I quit alcohol. Said, right, alcohol is just adding fuel to the fire here. It's not doing me any favors. It's not healthy. I'm gonna give that a rest. But I didn't give cannabis a rest because my reasoning is I kind of made an agreement with the universe. It's like, you can take everything else, but this is mine. I have this. I use this consciously and I use it with intention. So it's about the health benefits. It's not just because I love to get stoned.
Yeah.
That was so. Quitting alcohol, that was great. I changed job and I started working for a charity in Edinburgh called UPMO that does creative workshops for people with disabilities. It was a fantastic job. I absolutely loved it, and they're a great organization. But I still felt edgy. I still felt really nervous, really stressed. For a period of 2.5 years, every time my phone buzzed, every time there was a call, that could have been my dad gone. So I was always just waiting for something to happen. And eventually one day I was walking through Ocean Terminal and there was a stand the juice bar on the entrance to Ocean Terminal.
Yeah.
Big poster, CBD here. And I was like, all right, okay, I've heard about this. I'd heard about CBD maybe 2010, 2011 kind of time. It was round about the time, there's a brand of CBD products called Charlotte's Web. And it was round about 2010 that they really started to, like CBD and Charlotte's Web particularly became a famous thing. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. That's cool. All right. Never really thought about it. Started taking it, and within about 2 weeks of using CBD oil every day, just on top of, not in replacement of my regular cannabis use or in replacement of anything else,
just supplement
just a little bit at a time, a couple of times a day. Within 2 weeks, I was making eye contact with people. I was leaving the house to do things I didn't have to do. And if something came in that I had to do, I just did it. I didn't bury my head. I didn't hide from things, because that's often what I did. So let's just imagine a bill comes through the door. Panic. Hide the letter. Don't think about it. It'll be fine. No, it's not. But, you just react sometimes. What I noticed with CBD is like there was like a little buffer where I didn't react straight away, and it was just long enough for me to sort of adjust my reaction before I reacted, so that I reacted more positively. About maybe a week or two after I first started noticing what CBD was doing, I got a promotion at work. And not long after that, I actually decided to start planning the business.
Seriously?
Yeah, it was don't get me wrong, it wasn't like a miracle by anything, but in comparison, it's very, CBD is very, very, very subtle. When you first start taking it, you probably won't notice it. And that's the point. You're not supposed to notice it. It's a non-psychoactive component of the cannabis plant. And it's often the little things that you don't notice that you then notice. So for me, it was walking into a supermarket and making small talk with the woman behind the counter, and then walking out and being like, what was that? I don't speak to people in public. This is okay. Is this what it feels like to be normal? This is nice. I like this. So yeah, I started looking into opening a business. Did about a year of planning, and then opened the shop, and a year later, here we are.
Wow.
What a ride.
Yeah. Jeez, I was going back to, the interaction with the person in the supermarket, for example. I mean, do you think that cannabis would be one of the reasons that would make you uneasy in that circumstance, because it's something that can cause paranoia, I guess?
Depends on the person. So one, there's always the issue of tolerance. Everyone has a different tolerance to cannabis. Some people get on really well with it. Some people just don't like it, and that's fine. If you're someone who's used cannabis regularly throughout your life, it's probably not going to bother you. Chances are, there are people, you have had meals cooked by people who were high. You have been served in restaurants. You have been in shops and served people who are high. I guarantee you've been served alcohol in a bar by someone who had a joint before work. There are sound guys who smoke weed because of their Crohn's. I know at least one. There are, nurses who use cannabis because they don't want to use alcohol. There are teachers who use cannabis because it means they can get their job done. They get their work done at home, and all their sort of marketing and stuff, and they don't feel hard done by. People use it for different reasons. Some people, just don't. For some people, they will use cannabis at home and they don't want to go outside. Some people do. I have no problem getting up, getting high, and just not getting baked. And this is the other thing as well.
Yeah.
I think nomenclature is important. It's not like I'm stoating around the place, with third eye blazing in the center of my face. I get a little bit. I get to take a little bit of cannabis.
It's like microdosing,
more or less. I mean, I could more or less. I would say every morning I'll take maybe 1 or 2 milligrams of THC, and that's just enough to make it psychoactive. It's enough to give the receptors a little tickle, but not enough that you're going to be whatever. So that doesn't bother me. I can quite comfortably walk into a supermarket and just kind of enjoy it. That being said, maybe 10 years ago when I was younger, when you're young, you're way more sensitive and more likely to experience negative side effects. So you can walk into a supermarket and suddenly not only are there people, but if you look around the place, everything's laid out really straight, almost like someone wanted it to sit like that. Oh man, those lights are really bright. I can't take that. Why are there so many types of cereal? It just kind of takes the blinkers off, and suddenly you start noticing way too much. And this is the thing, when it comes to managing your attention, you don't want to be noticing too little, and you don't want to be noticing too much. In the same way, it's all about balance, and this is something that's really important with cannabis. Is promoting and maintaining balance. You don't want to be too hungry, but but you don't want to be too full. You don't want to be too hot or too cold. You don't want to sleep too long, and you don't want to sleep too little. You got to find that kind of sweet spot in the middle. So yeah, I mean, whether or not people choose to do things, like there's always reasons why certain people will have a reaction to a certain kind of thing. Sometimes you can just be having a bad day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've been stone cold sober in shops and had a bad time. It's
exactly.
It happens. It may be more likely to happen with cannabis.
Yeah.
But it's how you use it. I think that's one of the things in like intention, like why are you using this?
100%.
Yeah,
that's something that I was very much going to speak to you about, actually. I think you've mostly covered what I would have asked, but yeah, like what is your kind of purpose behind why you do it, as opposed to simply accessing an alternative state of consciousness or just altering your state of consciousness, I suppose. Like, is there a sort of greater meaning behind it? But obviously, given your past as well, the anti-depressant, anti-anxiety type effects are
health.
Obviously,
it's all about health. I think first and foremost, cannabis is a health product. Now that can be THC or CBD or both. Like, it is first and foremost about your health. Even people who say that they use cannabis merely recreationally, whether you intend it that way or not, it still does you, like physiologically, it does you good. So whether you intend it or not, it's still having a medical effect on you. And I don't think that's particularly controversial to say, because there are already 2 or 3 other G8 countries who have not only legalized cannabis for medical use, but like recreational. And Canada is the most famous one, who've just kind of went, yeah, cool, it's all legal. Now there's still limits to what's going on in Canada, and there's upsides and downsides to the way they've gone about legalizing it. But it's really important that they've just kind of accepted that cannabis has a place in society, and by prohibiting it, you just make it more dangerous. Yeah. For me, first and foremost, it's health. I mean, of course, it's a pleasant drug to take. It's wonderful. But you can't. It's not like you can't enjoy your medicine. You're allowed to do that. It's great. It's one of the things it's very good for. Is that not only will it make you feel better, it's actually kind of fun to do. It's not like like cod liver oil or something where it tastes really horrible. It's good for you. Your brain uses cannabinoids routinely. Cannabis is just a plant that makes cannabinoids. It's not even the only plant that makes cannabinoids. Olives, oregano, chocolate, cotton, coffee, they all have trace amounts of cannabinoids in them. Flax as well. Yeah, so there's loads of different plants that you make and use cannabinoids. Every animal that has a spine has a cannabinoid system. Yeah. So we're hardwired with the hardware. We have the receptors in place. Use them. Just use them with intention. Exactly. Be conscious of what you take. Yeah. And it's something that I'm very careful with. So like with my cannabis use, I try to make sure I know what strain I'm buying. Now, not everyone's as I was going to get into this with you, Dan, because Joe Rogan, who I'm sure will probably come up again, he speaks about, he uses sativa as opposed to indica. And he says that with that he gets less kind of vegetative and more like, I want to go and do stuff. Yeah. What's your personal favorite? And just before you get to that, actually, have you ingested cannabis before coming here today? Yeah. Yeah, like every day. In what form? I vaped it. So really? I have a little dry herb vaporizer device.
You don't seem like someone that's stoned.
No. Remember that? Have you seen The Avengers?
Yes.
I remember that scene where Mark Ruffalo, the Incredible Hulk, and he's like, that's my secret. I'm always angry. Just what he thinks. Like I use a dry herb vaporizer. I use some CBD cannabis, and then I put a little tiny bit of THC cannabis on top of that, just to give it a little tickle. Just I don't want to have a whole vape of just THC cannabis.
Say what you did. Say that again.
So I've got 2 different. So I'll have 2 different types of cannabis. One which is just CBD, one which is sort of illegal street weed.
CBD in what form? Is it liquid?
Herbal.
Is it liquid form?
Hemp flowers.
Okay.
Yeah, so hemp buds. So it's cannabis that's been bred to just have CBD. Doesn't have like much THC in it. Not enough to have any psychoactive effect. And I'll just mix those 2 together. And sometimes, depending on how I feel, if I'm having a really bad day, I'll maybe put a little bit extra THC in it. But it's not often that I'll just use THC by itself. But yeah, I'll do that pretty much every day, and I'll do it when I get home as well. And it's just like, it's not like I'm going to get home and just sit and rip bongs all night. I've not got time for that. I'll get home, I'll have a little bit of weed, sit down for 20 minutes, and I'll go do the dishes because I'm an adult and I've got things to do. I'll cook dinner and I'll really enjoy cooking. It's great. You ever cook when you're high? It's amazing. You just sit there, all the smells and aromas, and you really pay attention. Like you really pay attention to the little bubbles and all the little mood. You go, look at that. It's great fun. Dishes as well. Can't beat doing the dishes. You get your hands all wet and all those bubbles, and it's all clean. You feel really productive afterwards. You feel like you earned it. But yeah, anyway, sativa and indica.
Yeah.
I mean, sativas tend to be daytime cannabis strains, and indicas tend to be nighttime. And one of the big differences between the two.
In what sense? In their growth phase, or in you mean in terms of your own personal consumption and opinion? Or?
Oh, just in general. So everyone will have like a different type of cannabis that will suit them better. And there's actually companies in the States and in Canada that can do a basic genetic test, and they'll give you a good idea of what types of cannabis will suit you best. But as a general rule, sativas, they tend to be like better for the daytime because they're quite energetic. So they tend to prioritize the brain, so they'll get the mind going. They might make you more sociable or more creative or more energetic. It lifts you. Indicas, traditionally, indicas tend to be higher in THC. And part of what that does is it kind of makes it'll affect you more. So a little bit of a harder hit. And they'll also have different terpene profiles. And terpenes, I've probably mentioned that word before. I'll explain what that is. Terpenes are aromatic compounds that the plant makes. And every plant makes terpenes. Lavender makes linalool. Mangoes make myrcene, pine trees make pinene, lemons make limonene. So every plant has a certain smell that it makes, and the cannabis plant just brings them all together, and that's why it smells like it does. It's a very complex smell. You can have dozens of different terpenes in different quantities in different strains of weed. So what you can actually then do is you can see that you'll be able to get like two strains of cannabis that have the same THC and CBD content, but if one of them's kind of citrusy and one of them's kind of musky, well, that's your nighttime one, that's your daytime one. So you can kind of play it that way. For someone like Joe Rogan using a sativa, I'm not surprised. He's an active guy. And particularly does BJJ as well, and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They love weed, like they are all about it. So I'm not surprised. For some people, like the vegetative side of things, again, like there's like certain strains of cannabis like Gorilla Glue, which is now known as GG number 4 for copyright reasons. But the reason it's called Gorilla Glue is it's indica heavy, and you get stuck to the couch. You're stuck. You're like, I'm not going to move. Whereas there's sometimes, if you have some cannabis and you feel a little bit edgy, a little bit energetic, use it. Use the energy. Like, not all cannabis is good for sitting down and watching Game of Thrones or whatever, or marathoning a Netflix show. Some cannabis wants you to go outside, wants you to get a little bit of activity around you. But the thing is, like, as well, like, most strains of cannabis are somewhere in between. Because there's been so much breeding of different types of cannabis over the years, most cannabis strains are hybrids, but they'll lean one way or the other. Honestly, the best way to find out what works for you is just to try different things. I think it's why places like the States and even like the Netherlands and with their coffee shop system, you can walk into a shop, you can smell different things because the nose knows. Like, you can always tell, like, by smelling it. Smell it, see if you get a good vibe from it, and if you trust your nose, always trust your nose. But being able to sort of try different things and work out what works best for you. I mean, I'll give you an example of 2 types of cannabis that I've used within the last year. One of them was blue cheese. Now, I've noticed that anything that has blue in the name, I'm all over it. So there's a type of cannabis called blueberry. It's an indica, and that must be something that it gels with me. So Blue Dream, I love Blue Dream, but blue cheese, it's a really nice indica. It's got a really musky kind of tropical fruit smell and a little bit of cheese as well, of course. And it was nice for the nighttime. Like in the evening time, you sit down with that, it's relaxing. You're just chilling. You're just chilling. Wouldn't use it in the morning.
Quick question for you, man. I'm really sorry. I've been to Amsterdam a number of times, and you go into a coffee shop in Amsterdam and there's a smorgasbord of everything that you want to try. But obviously in somewhere like Scotland or in the UK, where the laws prohibit distribution and consumption of cannabis, where do you sort of find this selection of
you got to get a good dealer, right? It's
another thing that I just want to say as a sort of caveat to this is that I think, like, for the longest time, the perception of cannabis has been that it is this evil, ugly drug that is illegal because it, it makes people, bad people
Reefer
for whatever it is, or
madness.
just
Yeah.
or it makes people lazy, or it screws the sort of the system, so to speak. But listening to yourself, like, you're clearly a smart, educated guy. You know what you're talking about. Graham Hancock, who's, and even Joe Rogan himself are people that have massively shifted my sort of view of cannabis as something that's just there to be, used and abused by people, to something that actually you can gain from a health perspective. You can gain massively from it.
Absolutely. It's what I say is, like, the law on cannabis, like, I like to describe, when I speak to customers in the shop, I like to describe the laws on cannabis a bit like an old car. So you've inherited this car, it's just landed in your lap. It's not pretty. It doesn't really drive very well. It's not safe. Wherever it's going, it's not getting there soon, and it's not going to get there in one piece, right? It's a bit of, it's a fixer-upper. It's not a good car. And the MOT's coming around, and you're not going to spend a lot of money on it, are you? You're going to maybe get some second-hand tires, but a gaffer tape on that, squirt of oil and all that. You're not going to put any real effort into it, right? Eventually, you're just going to have to get a new car. Eventually, we're going to need to have this honest conversation. Maybe, like a year or two ago, the government's official position on cannabis was that it's a drug of abuse, a Class B narcotic, Schedule 1 or whatever. And all of a sudden, a 12-year-old boy nearly dies on TV, and that'd be really bad PR. And the Home Secretary goes, "Oh no, it's a medicine now." How convenient, right? How convenient that, when someone was about to die on TV, the Home Secretary decides now is the time to listen to evidence that's been put to the government for, like, the best part of a decade. I mean, the MS Society has campaigned for years to allow treatment, MS patients to access medical cannabis. Canada have been prescribing cannabis since 2002. California since 96. There are other countries that have done it before that. We've been using this plant for tens of thousands of years. The earliest medical records are maybe like 5,000 years ago, and that's like ancient China. Even if we want to just focus on Western medicine, the first Western doctor to use THC in his practice was an Irish physician called William Brooke O'Shaughnessy. William Brooke O'Shaughnessy travelled the world. He went to India and he found this strange type of hemp. It looked like the hemp that we had in Europe, but this hemp was different because it had an effect on you. So he brought some of it back, and it was called Indian hemp. That's what they called it. Little did they know that it had THC in it. What he started doing was he did some experiments, and he actually found that it was very good at controlling seizures, particularly in children. And this is the Victorian era. We're talking about the 1830s. In the 1830s, people were testing using, and quite successfully using, cannabis to treat childhood epilepsy. And then, but there's no medical benefit. We couldn't possibly allow that, right? Oh, God forbid. No, it's just those hippies. They just want to get stoned. If you want to abuse a drug, you'll always find an excuse. Isn't that right? So suddenly the government saw the light that this plant has medical utility, and yeah, it can be abused. But to quote Joe Rogan, you can abuse cheeseburgers. Yeah, like I see, like literally opposite my shop, there is a Baines bakery, and there are people that I see going in there every day. I'm not saying you can't have a wee sausage roll now and then, but if you're eating the same tripe literal tripe, mushed up stuff that's been deep fried in like batter or whatever, that's not healthy, but you're allowed to do it. You can buy alcohol almost anywhere in Scotland, particularly in Edinburgh. Like Edinburgh has more licensed venues, licensed premises than like anywhere else in Scotland. Like you've got like cinemas, cafes. The joke I like to use is that during the Edinburgh Festival, every hedgerow, postbox, and phone box becomes a pop-up bar. Like it's everywhere. It's so endemic. Yeah. I used to work at the Scotch Whisky Experience at the top of the Royal Mile. It's a lovely place. The people that work there are fantastic. But honestly, it's a glorified off-license. You go through the tour. When you get to the end of the tour, of course you exit through the shop, and the shop is just row after row after row of bottles of Scotch. And each bottle of Scotch is enough to kill you. Like there is enough ethanol in a bottle of spirit to kill you. Yeah. And that's fine. You can buy 2 bottles if you want, whatever. That's allowed, but weed.
Mm.
Oh,
But
slow down there.
Even look at the social impact of alcohol as a whole, in terms of people become massively, or can become massively aggressive on alcohol. Like, how many people that have consumed cannabis are becoming
it's rare
to start fights?
It's rare. The vast majority of cannabis users do so in the privacy of their own home, primarily because of the law, but also because of, that's where it's best used. Like, I can't, like, I like the idea of coffee shop culture and this idea of having a place to go where you can, like, use cannabis in a social setting, but there'll always be like that, I just want to go home, mate. I just gotta sit on my couch, get all my stuff, get my blanket around me and just fire up my Netflix or play some PlayStation, play some guitar. There's something quite private about it, as well as being, as well as being social, it's also quite private. Alcohol, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. You have to do it with other people. You can't do it alone. God forbid. If you drink alone, that's a problem. And I remember the first time I used cannabis alone. The first time I used cannabis just by myself, just having a wee toot by myself. I was maybe like 20, 21 years old, and I was like, oh God, am I an addict? Is this it? Is this the slippery slope? Before you know it, I'll be doing heroin and crack and all that. Oh God. An hour later, it was fine. The paranoia, surprise, the paranoia wore off.
That narrative's so prevalent. Like, cannabis is a gateway drug into everything else.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, you want to be careful with that cannabis. Ooh. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I only ever tried cannabis because I tried alcohol first. I only ever tried a cigarette because I drank first. Any substance that I've consumed, there's always been alcohol at the start of that. And we live in a culture where a parent can give their kid like a glass of wine or a little beer or something, and some parents will get some Alka Pops for the teenagers for the wee house party, but just don't go nuts on it and all that. We allow it, we tolerate it. In fact, we tolerate it far too much, because physiologically it is one of the most harmful substances on the planet, and I cannot stress that enough. It's an obesogenic carcinogen, and it's neurotoxic at any dose. It does all kinds of horrible things to your brain and body, and you know what the worst about it is? You won't even notice it till you're old. The majority of people who are admitted to hospital with alcohol-related conditions are over the age of 50. I've got a friend who works in the third sector, and her job is to convince people, like older people, to stop drinking so much. Because so when you're a teenager, you don't get hangovers, and then in your 20s you discover the hangover. In your 30s, hangovers become an existential crisis, and then by the time you get maybe 50, 60 years old, you just don't really get hangovers anymore. You don't notice what it's doing, because what it's doing is, like, one of the things that alcohol does, and does it very well. At the end of each chromosome, the end of your DNA, at the end of each chromosome, there's a little thing called a telomere. And this telomere, it's kind of like a staple. It holds the two strands of DNA together. So we've got like that double helix. Someone's got to hold that together. It's a little telomere. Now, every time your DNA replicates itself, that telomere unzips and it splits, and then it reattaches itself. But every time it does that, it accumulates a little bit of damage. Alcohol dissolves that. Alcohol, ethanol, the ethanol that you consume in wine or in beer or in a spirit, it will go for those little telomeres and start to break them down earlier, which means you're more likely to have cancer, because those genes break, those genetic structures breaking down, that can lead to cancer. Alcohol is positively associated with several types of cancer, as well as diabetes, and pretty much every mental health condition you can imagine. There is no mental health condition that is made better by alcohol. There is no medical effect you can get from alcohol that you cannot get safer from somewhere else.
So why is it legal?
Absolutely. Good question, right? Well, my view is that society tends to allow drugs that keep you productive. So the big ones are caffeine and alcohol. Caffeine gets you through the day. Alcohol shuts you up at night. That's the balance of those two. We don't have to go back too far. You go back to like the 1920s in America, where they prohibited alcohol, and see how well that went. And they decided, right, prohibition's not such a good idea. Less than a decade later, they prohibited cannabis. And look what's happened. We now have super strong strains. There's nothing wrong with super strong strains. I have no problem with strains like Girl Scout cookies and skunk and cheese and these really potent strains. They're fine. They have their place. But we're at a point now where we have more variety than ever, but less choice. Because you don't you can't walk into a little shop and say, hello there, I'd like something that's not too heavy on the THC. I want something that's nice and light. Cool, my man. No, you get a text from your guys like, what's up, man? Got that easy peasy lemon squeezy as the special price fresh in from the damn Cali bud, buddy. Really? Or was it grown in like a garage in your house? You don't know. You can't tell. And there's got to be choices. I think that's the thing. In Canada, because they've now got a legal system, more and more companies are now doing products that are not just exclusively THC. Because the black market loves THC. The black market, it's a profitable compound. You can bulk up the plant with that and you will sell it, because everyone who smokes it, oh, that's the good stuff, right? That's the good, it's the fun stuff. It's not necessarily the good stuff. More and more people are using high CBD products, or even just products that are kind of half and half. So if you go back to the 1960s, all those hippies at Woodstock, they weren't like, smoking Stardog, and they weren't smoking gelato and all these fancy strains. They were using this kind of dry, sticky, seedy stuff that just kind of grew in the dirt. And it was maybe 2 or 3% THC and 2 or 3% CBD, and none of them complained. It's not like you had all these hippies being like, oh man, that weed was good, but I could go for a dab. Do you know what I mean? Can we just get this, maybe could we extract this and turn it into a 95% concentrate that I can then inhale through a bong? Let's do that. People were content with that. What happens is that when you put the control of a substance into the black market does what it wants. And in this case, what the black market's done is bred plants exclusively for THC content. There's a balance to that, because there's also a lot of breeding that's done to bring out other aspects of the plant, so specific flavor profiles or kind of effects. So you want the kind of bright, bubbly, giggly aspect of this plant, but you also want the kind of pain relieving body relaxation aspect of this plant. Breed them, see what happens. Cool. Essentially, people need to have choices, and more THC is not always a good thing. It's not a harmless substance. I never say it's harmless.
Yeah, I actually was going to say that to you. I'm very cognizant of the fact that I don't want this to come off as some sort of massive pro. Like this is really, my sort of objective with this is to try and help at least educate people on it, so that they have a more balanced view. But it's not a sort of go out and buy it because it's completely risk free.
No, well, absolutely. And don't buy it because it's illegal. I cannot encourage you to break the law. Do not go out and buy cannabis. It's a Class B drug. But there are risks associated with it. So notably with cannabis, there's mental health risks. So if you're someone who has a family history or a personal history of psychosis or schizophrenic illness, you should be wary. That being said, there is a tendency for people with these types of illness to gravitate not just towards other substances, but particularly towards cannabis. There's a really interesting, one of the peers, she's a lady in the House of Lords, I can't remember her name, and she's a psychiatrist. And she said for years she saw psychotic patients who were having breakdowns and episodes, but they always kept smoking weed. And she's like, well, why do you keep using cannabis if it makes you feel worse? And the answer was always the same. It's it makes me feel worse at the time, but later on I feel better. And that's because the THC in the cannabis that you get, your brain knows what to do with THC, right? Your brain makes its own version of THC. It's a chemical called anandamide. We have our own cannabinoids. Anandamide and THC, they're very, very similar. You look at them under a microscope, they behave the same way. Your brain knows how to treat that. It's going to enjoy it for a little bit. It's going to spike your dopamine levels, and it's going to peak at about, after you inhale it, it's going to peak at about 15 to 20 minutes. And that's as bad as it's going to get. If you feel bad at that point, you've got through the worst of it. From here on in, it's going to ebb out of your bloodstream, and it's going to return to a near baseline level over the course of about an hour. So your brain knows how to get rid of THC, but things like CBD and these other cannabinoids, so like CBG, CBDV, THCV, there's loads and hundreds of these cannabinoids that tend to linger around a little bit longer, and they're more associated with the calmness and sort of providing a kind of stillness to the mind, rather than, if you think about THC, just kind of stirring it up. And this is the thing, THC doesn't switch things off. THC switches things on. It's not surprising that people can feel nervous or anxious. Often people report if they use THC and they're not familiar with it, that, their mind was racing, their mind was going too fast, there's too much going on. You become more aware. It's switching you on. It's switching on the endocannabinoid system in the same way that coffee switches it off. The two of them regulate on it. It's really interesting. They did an experiment a couple of weeks ago. They released some studies that said that when you drink coffee, it down-regulates the endocannabinoid system, and when you use cannabis, it up-regulates them, which is why they go well together. They kind of balance one another out. Yeah, it's interesting. But it's this idea that cannabis switches things on. It gets you going. It activates part of your brain more than it turns off. And finding a right balance for you. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. There's not a law that says you have to use it. But it is of utility. I think that everyone should give it a try. I don't mean to say that everyone should go out and buy like a pipe and just buy some weed or some hash and just have a weed smoke. Find something that works for you. Like in the shop I work in, like in my shop, should I say, like we do loads of different types of things. We've got vape liquids, we've got oils and pastes and tea bags. There's loads of different ways to use cannabis, and there is utility from it. There's good reason, health reasons for you to do this beyond just getting high. I mean, THC and CBD as the sort of primary cannabinoids, they both do a lot of very important things. Like your brain and your endocannabinoid system can use them to do things. Like they are tools. They're not doing anything that your body isn't doing already, but they're adding to what your body can do. It's like giving your body the kind of the tools it needs to do certain jobs. If you feel ill, if you don't feel well, find something that works. And I think cannabis is probably the best place to start. And that's me coming at it from a purely health perspective. If you're talking about recreational, yeah, cool. Yeah, if you want to smoke weed recreationally, go for it. But if you're thinking about your health and your well-being, cannabis is a great place to start because it's the least likely to do you any harm. Like while we talk about the harms of cannabis and like mental health problems, it's really rare. Like people don't understand how rare cannabis-induced psychosis is. In order to prevent one instance of cannabis-induced psychosis, you would need to stop 20,000 people from using it. That's 1 to 20,000 is it's a wide gap. Alcohol-induced psychosis, 1 in 200. That's an order of magnitude smaller. You're way more likely to suffer negative mental health effects from using alcohol than using cannabis. And there's also some really interesting studies that say that the risk of negative effects of cannabis are exacerbated by alcohol. So it's other drug use alongside cannabis. If you just use cannabis by itself, you're less likely. But if you're mixing in tobacco and alcohol, and maybe you're doing a couple of lines in the toilet and you're just a party boy and you're out the weekend having a great time and suddenly you feel really bad and you can't figure out why, and you've too much of a good thing, right?
Do you care whatsoever as to what other people think about you and your use of cannabis?
It doesn't really concern them or me.
Okay.
It doesn't concern them, like my use of cannabis, and it doesn't really concern me what they think about it. It's not particularly important. It's not, I don't wear a big weed leaf badge, and I remember years ago seeing a guy on the Royal Mile with a huge flag, a big saltire flag with a weed leaf on it and a big sign saying legalize cannabis. And it's like, that guy, he's doing well. It didn't work. I mean, it's still illegal, right? But that guy's he's going for.
He's flying the flag.
Exactly, literally. I mean, I'm quite quiet about it. Like, it's not like it's part of me. It's part of my daily routine. It's part of it's my career at this point. But it's fine. I don't judge. It's not judge people for what they take. The people that come into my shop, I meet people from all walks of life who use cannabis. Yeah, I get people who are just local to the shop. I also I've got a couple of nurses, more than a few care workers, because care is a stressful job. At least one doctor and at least one psychiatrist as well. So I mean, I'll not get too specific, but I know at least 2 or 3 people who work, or customers who work at the Parliament, who they don't drink, but when they're at the bar with their friends, they'll just nip outside for a quick joint. Honest to God. So that means that's how common this is.
Do you think it is becoming more socially accepted?
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, it's almost impossible to walk around Edinburgh without smelling weed. Like, it's everywhere. A woman came into the shop a couple of weeks ago. She's from the Netherlands, and she was like, "Yeah, more people smoke weed here than in the Netherlands." Like, it's crazy. I mean, if you walk up and down the streets, most of the sort of corner shops will have bongs and pipes in the windows.
That's right.
There are more and more kind of vape shops that are starting to sell CBD, and I'm not going to be surprised surprised when I see more and more CBD shops showing up. Like my idea was I wanted to make CBD as mainstream as possible, because here we have something that can communicate the positive health effects of cannabis, but without the unwanted intoxication if you don't want that.
Am I right in thinking that you're the only shop currently, or the first to market?
Certainly the first, and certainly the first specialist. Like there are other CBD shops that sell CBD, like vape shops or head shops, and I have nothing against that. That's absolutely fine. But I wouldn't buy my shampoo from a shoe shop. I like to, one of the things we like when you come into the shop, like we talk about cannabis. We're not going to shy away from things. We're not making medical claims. I'm not sort of waving a big flag saying if you have X, Y, or Z condition, take it and roll up for Uncle Dan's miracle snake oil and all that. No. We will give you choices. We will show you different types of products, and we'll give you advice on how to get the most from them. The best advice is to start low. Loads of people come in, they're like, oh, I've got really bad symptoms and I've been smoking weed for 40 years, every day for 40 years, I need the strongest stuff. And you don't. How much CBD was in that weed? Probably none. You've never had a dose of CBD by itself. If you've never in order to take CBD by itself, you need to consciously do it. If you've never consciously done it, you've not done it. Start off low. I have seen more people put off by taking too much than by taking too little CBD. Because people kind of worry that because it's non-psychoactive, and because we tend to describe it as being a kind of a gentle experience, and it's more about the long game than the immediate effect. People assume that more is more. More is not more. Less is more. Take a little bit at a time. I have seen people stunned, like daily cannabis users stunned, and I was one of them, stunned by how much effect 1 or 2 drops of oil under your tongue can do. But over a long period, like over a couple of weeks, like play the long game. If you're going in, like I've seen people like there's a guy came in one day, and I was like, right, we normally start you off in something like this. This is 2.5% or 250 milligrams. It's 2 different ways of saying the same thing. Here we go. This is what we'll take. You start off with 1 or 2 drops under your tongue. No, mate, I'm going to go for that one. 6%. So we've more than doubled the concentration. It's like, oh, no, man, I wouldn't recommend going. I'll go for it. All right, but when you take it, shake the bottle well. All right, give it a good shake. And just 1 drop. Just start with 1 drop and see how you go from there. I get an email maybe 9 o'clock at night. I took 6 drops of that and I feel weird. Are you surprised? What have we learned? I don't like. I like to joke that I am the worst salesman in Edinburgh, because I want everyone to come into my shop and spend as little money as possible. Because I don't want you to come in and buy the £99 bottle straight away. I don't want you to come in and drop 70 quid on all the bits and pieces. I want you to find one thing. Make it a little part of your routine. Maybe it's a little bottle of oil, and you'll leave that next to your toothbrush, and you'll just remember to do it every day. Maybe it's tea. Maybe you like tea, so you get some hemp tea. Maybe sit that in the kitchen and you have that. Maybe it's a vape. Maybe you like to vape. Yeah, cool. We've got liquids for that. Pop it in your tank and away you go. But just take a little bit and ease it into your system. Like one of the things, the endocannabinoid system, there's a really good article I recommend people to read if they want to understand a bit more about how the endocannabinoid system works. And it's just called Endocannabinoids and Exercise. It was published in like 2012 or something in the British Medical Journal. And it's a study about how the body uses cannabinoids through exercise. So one of the kind of like sort of pop culture references we use is that when you do exercise, you get endorphins, right? Endorphins make you feel good. No, endorphins are painkillers. Your brain does not reward you with endogenous morphine. That would not be a productive thing to do, because you would just do exercise nonstop because you're getting really, really high on endorphins. However, your brain will reward you with cannabinoids. Whenever you run, it's a high impact exercise, and if you run for long enough and far enough, you're going to accumulate a lot of inflammation, and what do you end up getting? Runner's high. You feel happy, you feel hungry, you feel sleepy. Do these sound familiar? You're getting those kind of like, oh, okay. You get a buzz. People report feeling euphoric and feeling more connected to nature. These dirty hippies, get back to work. What? We use cannabinoids to not only to encourage us to rest and to eat, but to also make us feel good about exercise. And also things like things like the endocannabinoids and THC and CBD, they act as anti-inflammatories. Like our whole body, every part of our body uses cannabinoids. So the brain uses cannabinoids in just about every part of it, except the brain stem. The brain stem does not use cannabinoids to any great extent, which is why no one can overdose on cannabis. You can't take too much that you'll kill you. That being said, people have died while under the influence of cannabis, and cannabis has contributed to deaths, but not as an overdose. So when people say you can't overdose on it, that's what it means. You can't physically fit enough of it in your body to kill you.
Yeah.
If you take a lot of it, you might have a panic attack. There was an older gentleman who died last year, had a heart attack after consuming, it was like 80 milligrams of THC, which is an incredibly high amount. He's like, I'll just have this lollipop. And that's a lollipop. That was a serious lollipop. That's like a one lick, put it down for half an hour kind of lollipop. He had a huge panic attack and passed away.
Jeez.
A couple of years ago, there was a woman who died after smoking half a joint, and the newspapers love this. Like, she had half a joint. Look at her now. Well, the 2 weeks before that, she was on a bender. She was taking cocaine and alcohol. She hadn't slept or eaten in days. Straw, camel. It's that kind of.
Exactly.
It contributes, but at any rate, cannabis has a lot of utility, and read that article, Endocannabinoids and Exercise. Is a great place to start. It's available for free online. Our body, the brain uses them, so your moods, your memory, sleep, appetite, pain sensation, pleasure, motivation, loads of different aspects, even like your cerebellum, which coordinates your bodily movements. They all use cannabinoids to a greater or lesser extent. Every dopamine channel in your brain has cannabinoid receptors. Now, the way that kind of works, so you've got two nerves, and where they meet is called a synapse. And what happens is the little electrical signal travels along one nerve, and then it triggers the release of a chemical that goes across the gap, and then that chemical is received by the other side, and the signal continues. Now, if you zoom in a little bit more, before that first chemical is released, there's another little tiny one. It's a cannabinoid. You need that cannabinoid. And that cannabinoid not only works on this side of the synapse, it travels across with the dopamine and then triggers another cannabinoid receptor, which then goes back and turns off the first one. So what they do is, it's rather than being like an on switch and an off switch, it's an on switch and a dimmer switch. So together, these cannabinoids they kind of self-regulate because their aim is to get things balanced. You don't want too much dopamine, but at the same time, not having enough is pretty terrible. The same goes for serotonin. Like, not all of your serotonin pathways, but about good proportion, maybe 40 to 50% of them use cannabinoid receptors. Cannabinoid receptors are amongst the most prevalent G protein coupled receptors in the brain. It's really, really important. You need these to live. It just so happens this silly, smelly little plant makes them too. Great, right? But let's travel down the body. We'll stick in the central nervous system for a little bit longer. The eyes, you've got rods and cones, different retina in your eyes. I can't remember which one's which. One of them identifies light and dark. The other one identifies color. You can't see in color without cannabinoids. When you're hungry, the cannabinoids on your olfactory nerve, which carries sensory information from the nose to the brain, the cannabinoids in there, they spike. So when you're hungry, cannabinoids make you hungrier. They make you seek out food by encouraging you to smell things. And interestingly, the olfactory nerve runs from the nose up to the brain, and it runs past the part of the brain called the hippocampus. Hippocampus, which regulates, amongst other things, memory, which is why smelling things can often elicit a kind of a memory response. You can kind of smell, rather than asking someone, what does that smell like? Ask someone, what does that remind you of? It's all about language. Moving down into your gut, right? Your gut uses loads of cannabinoids. Like, it's your second brain, right? Like, a lot of behaviors and a lot of conditions that affect the brain can also be, you can see stuff in the gut. There's like a connection. A lot of the same receptors and same chemicals that our brain uses are down here. A lot of our behavior is controlled by bacteria in the gut. Like, have you ever had a sugar craving? I'm not hungry, I'm not thirsty, but I need sugar. Like, what's that? That's your gut. That's your gut telling you, so you're pulling some strings, and sure enough, your whole gut, your digestive tract is riddled with cannabinoid receptors. Your liver, good for you, cannabinoid receptors. Now, what about your spleen? Well, funnily enough, your muscles, you need cannabinoids in there. Your bones, NASA have used CBD in experiments on astronauts, to help rebuild their bones when they get back from space. Because when you go in space, your body starts to reabsorb the calcium from your bones. So you get back from space. Not that I've been, but astronauts get back and they're kind of weak as a kitten. And give them some CBD, they'll be fine. Give it a week or two. Where else? Reproductive organs. Yep. You can't reproduce without cannabinoids, and in particular, women. Women have way more cannabinoid receptors than men. Funnily enough, Whoopi Goldberg has a line of cannabis infused like women's sanitary products, so period care products, so suppositories, lubricants, pads, tampons, different products that are infused with THC and CBD to ease certain symptoms. Famously, Queen Victoria used to smoke joints when she had period pains.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's over 100 years. This is not new stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's new. I know a few women who don't use cannabis any other time of the year, or any other time of the month. But whenever they do have their period, they'll get a little bit of hash. They'll always have a little bit of something light that they can use just to kind of take the edge off. Nothing wrong with that. You know, easy peasy. Where else do we have cannabinoid receptors? This is one of my favorite ones. In your skin. So in your skin, you have little cells called melanocytes. And melanocytes produce pigment. They produce pigment called melanin. Now, melanin reacts into the sun, melanin. What else do you get from the sun? Vitamin D. You cannot produce pigment, and you do not get vitamin D, and then basically you can't enjoy the sunshine without cannabinoids. It doesn't have to be weed. You make them yourself. If you have a really healthy diet and you eat loads of like healthy fruit and vegetables, and you get a really good balance of omegas 3s and 3 and 6, and you got loads of amino acids going in there, loads of protein, and you do lots of exercise, and you're in the sun all the time, and you've got a meaningful life and lots of good social connections, and you're doing all these good things, then you're fine. Your cannabinoids will probably be okay. But for the rest of us, there's got to be a better source. Yeah. In the 1960s, a scientist called Raphael Mechoulam discovered THC and CBD. He was the first person to isolate these two chemicals. And one of the first things that happened after that was pharmaceutical companies started trying to copy them. Because obviously, pharmaceutical companies want to cash in on this. They knew that cannabis had a medical effect, but they couldn't use actual cannabinoids from the cannabis plant. So they had to make their own. These are called synthetic cannabinoids, which 30 years later were, found their way onto the street as spice and K2 and mamba and monkey dust and all these different quote unquote legal highs. Most of them were synthetic cannabinoids that had been shelved. They were shelved by the pharmaceutical companies because across the board they were unsuccessful. They made symptoms worse, they gave people really bad side effects, and they were actually quite harmful. Someone figured out how to synthesize them themselves and started spraying these chemicals on inert plant matter and selling it in little bags with a green eye on it. And there you go. It's a legal high. It's perfectly safe, because if it's legal, it's safe, right? Turns out synthetic cannabinoids are far, far worse than any real cannabis ever has been. And we have made the problem worse ourselves by allowing cannabis to be prohibited, and by enforcing that, people will always come up with an alternative. Cannabis use levels have not gone up or down significantly since Prohibition. Particularly in the UK, it was early 70s where it really became prohibited. So the Misuse of Drugs Act. Pre-70s, it was, I've spoken to customers who used to grow it in their garden in the 50s when they were kids. Not that everyone was on the weed back then or anything, but in the 1970s, the Misuse of Drugs Act, I think it's 1971. And basically that was off the back of Richard Nixon's war on drugs. We're going to fight drugs, are we? Great, good idea. What happened? Drugs have got cheaper, they're more plentiful, they're better quality, and none of the money goes back to helping people. None of it's taxed, none of it goes to fund the NHS, it just goes in someone's pocket. One of the things I wanted to do with my business, and it's why my business is a social enterprise, is I want to take the profits that cannabis and CBD will produce and invest them in people's health, so that the people who are supporting my business by shopping there, they get something back from it. So I want my rather than just profit going to shareholders, and I'll pay my tax, I'll make sure all my employees are looked after and whatnot, but the profit, I want to help people with it, because there's been enough people who have suffered needlessly. We are talking about decades, almost a century of people being having something so simple but so effective withheld from them on the premise that you might write jazz music if you smoke it. And that sounds ridiculous, but it's not far off. In the 1930s, there's a guy called, what's his name? Harry J. Enslinger. Harry used to work was it the Department of Narcotics or something? It was pre-DEA in America. And he actually worked in the organization that prohibited alcohol. So he was a big into prohibition He thought that alcohol prohibition, the fact that they re-legalized alcohol is a terrible shame, because all these men who had been going around kicking down stills and bursting open beer barrels, they had nothing to do. They needed something else to prohibit. Well, what's next? Well, that cannabis stuff. Well, this is the problem. They'll never ban cannabis because every doctor uses cannabis. Everyone knows what cannabis is. We all know what hemp is. We all grow it. We all know what it is. They'll never ban cannabis. What if we banned marijuana? Suddenly, we've got a foreign sounding name. And let's remember, it's 1930s America. It was quite a racy time. There's a lot of racist stuff. And if you look at the sort of prohibition campaign, a lot of it is like really like, ooh, it's not pleasant to read because there's a lot of really harsh stereotypes. 1938 is when that went through, prohibition of cannabis, or Prohibition of Marijuana Act. About 4 years after that, Enslinger was part of a government program to develop a truth serum. And you'll never guess what he used. He used concentrated THC oil in a little vial. And his thought was, right, what we'll do is we'll take this oil and we'll give it to people, and they'll be so disorientated and so confused and scared that they'll just spill the beans. They'll tell us all the secrets. So they did an experiment, and one of three things happened. One, the person got really giggly and didn't say anything. Two, the person got really paranoid because they'd just been dosed with something that they had no knowledge of and didn't have any context to understand the experience, so they didn't say anything. Or three, the bottles went missing. Were taken home by people because I'm not wasting that. I'm going to take that home and enjoy it myself. The guy was eventually sacked from the government in the 1960s for being pretty racist in the 1960s. So, and that's pretty much why cannabis is legal. It's illegal because it is, which isn't really a satisfying answer. But if you're looking for a satisfying answer, you're in the wrong place. There's no rationale behind making cannabis legal. It doesn't make people safer. It doesn't reduce the demand for cannabis. If anything, what ends up happening is that you get, as well as propaganda saying that it's really dangerous, you get this counter propaganda that's also not true. Like, oh, it's completely harmless. It's not. Every substance has its ups and downs. Particularly if you're a young person or if you have any kind of mental health problem, cannabis might not be the one for you. Like, part of the reason for that is, like I said earlier, your cannabis switches on parts of your brain. And when you're in your late teens, early 20s, your brain's already running at like full capacity. Switching it on is going to push you beyond what's comfortable. And that's why a lot of people tend to they go off cannabis, particularly in that kind of 25 to 30 group. People kind of go off it because, and I hear this all the time in work as well. It's like, I used to use it, but it's too strong nowadays. And it's like, well, it is. And it's not just that it's too strong, it's also that you've changed. Like, your brain changes as you age. It was one of my favorite classes at university, was learning about all the different stages of development throughout the human life cycle. By the time you get to like 50 or 60 years old, that's the time you should really be hitting the weed hard. You should be using it every day because you're getting to a point where your brain is starting to wind down, and you're also accumulating inflammation and other pathologies throughout your body. So things like arthritis and IBS and chronic pain, there's loads of things that become more, even like sleep disturbances are more common in older people because your body's kind of winding down. And part of that might just be that you're not producing enough cannabinoids. Your cannabinoid system's getting tired. Well, if you need vitamin C, eat an orange. If you need if you need some fresh air, open a window. If you need cannabinoids, get some cannabis. CBD to start with, and then introduce THC gradually. Everything you do with cannabis should be little and often, just tiny amounts. We know that it has a very, very good safety record. I mean, at the minute in the UK, there's a big debate going on with cannabis because it was made legal for medical purposes, but it's almost never prescribed. So in November of last year, it became legal that specialist doctors could prescribe cannabis where everything else would be tried. So when you've tried all the other steroids and opioids and different kinds of chemicals or kind of wild things, then you can try the wee plant. Try the wee plant that you could get all along anyway, but if you want to do it legally, then you can do it. And part of the problem is that the research that we have on cannabis doesn't really satisfy the kind of guidelines and the policies that are in place with how doctors prescribe medicine. And I'm not a person who disparages doctors. I know there are people who there's a lot of customers who have very negative opinions of their doctors because they've never got the answer they wanted. And I'm not one of those people. I think doctors know way more about human health than I do. They know way more. A pharmacist is going to know more about drugs than I do. A physio is going to know more about muscular skeletal function, but I know way more about weed than they do. And it's partially because I read this stuff. Like I read articles and journals and from written in different parts of the world, different jurisdictions, and I read books, I read things from antiquity, and I read all these little things about cannabis, and I also listen to people. I listen to what people are saying, so that there are doctors that are prescribing this as we speak. There is a doctor somewhere in America right now signing a prescription for weed. Like, and it's not just like, like a really controlled oil product or like a capsule. He is writing a prescription that says you can go into a dispensary and buy whatever you feel comfortable with. That's amazing. Because one of the things I tend to say about cannabis is that it's weird. And that's an understatement at best. Is it a medicine? Well, it's a bit too weird to be a medicine, because medicines are very, very controlled. They're very, very specific. And this is a weird little plant that produces hundreds of chemicals, and it doesn't treat any two people the same way ever. Like it's not like that. So it's not quite, doesn't really fit in the medicine box, but it's also way too potent to put in the herbal box. Like I love lavender tea, but cannabis has kind of got the edge on that. I mean, it's a social drug, but it's nothing like alcohol. You can smoke it, but it's nothing like tobacco. It has, there's been a lot of studies in the States in the last couple of years, because more and more people are using cannabis and smoking it. They wanted to see, is there a similar health risk as there is with tobacco? And the answer so far is not really. It doesn't really. It's tobacco massively harmful, but cannabis not so. It just doesn't really have the same effect. So what is it? You can eat it. It's not food. It doesn't fit in any particular category. It's its own thing, and because of that, it needs to be treated that way. It needs to be given and we also need to accept the fact that it's pretty safe. Worst case scenario, you fall asleep.
Yeah.
God forbid.
Awesome stuff, Dan. Where can people find you?
So the shop is located on Great Junction Street. It's, you get to the bottom of Leith Walk, turn left, we're straight there. You'll see my logo. It's a little butterfly. We have a website, which is hempcanhelp.co.uk, and we're also on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Hemp Community. We have a Facebook group called Hemp Chat, where it's a kind of community group where we talk about different things.
Is that open to the masses?
Open to the public. Just get involved. Most of the time, it's just me posting, but that's all good. I like getting people talking about this stuff. I love talking about cannabis, and I love seeing people get good results from it. It's one of the reasons I do what I do. My kind of 5-year plan is I want to have a farm. I want to, not just any farm, I want to have a farm that anyone can come to. I mean, this is a social enterprise, and my vision is I want you imagine like Dobby's, like a garden center. Like that, but cannabis.
Seriously?
You can come in, you can pick your own, we'll do lessons on how to grow your own, how to make your own oil. You want to weave a hemp basket? No problem, we can get you that. Paint a picture with hemp paint. You want to do some music therapy, you want to massage, you want to do this. All these services will be provided at this kind of holistic health hemp center place. I've not got a name for it yet. The farm. But it'll all be paid for by the profits of the business. So that's the money going back in. So you go out to the farm, you pick up an ounce of whatever product you want, but you'll also get a little shiatsu massage, or you can join in like a yoga class.
That sounds awesome.
Encouraging healthy people to make healthy choices, and just use a little bit of cannabis every day. Dead easy.
I like it, man. I like it a lot. Awesome. Dan, thanks so much for your time.
I'm grateful.
It's been a huge lesson in everything to do with cannabis. I hope people have enjoyed it. And if they want to ask more questions or find out more about CBD, then Dan's your man.
Yeah, come say hi.
Yeah. Cheers, buddy.
Thank you.
Thanks.